Okay. So I mentioned before to the people here in this room that I thought that the lesson actually had some really good bullet points, some checklists. You can see these checklists of what to do. So do you guys have buyers that you're working with already? Like, do you have people that you're going out with and actually showing homes to? Not yet. Haven't yet. So the most important thing when people call me on the phone and they want help finding a house is, in my opinion, before you go out and show anything, the most important thing is for them to talk to a mortgage lender. Because speaking from experience and spending loads of time showing houses to people that can't afford what you showed them or this and that, especially in this market, that's so crazy. I have to know what they're pre-approved for, what type of loan they're doing, like how much cash do they have? Like, can we work that at all with a bidding war? And also in Utah, it's pretty much expected that you'll have a pre-approval letter attached to your offer. When I do a lot of listings too, and when I have people send me offers with no pre-approval letter, I usually just reply back like, not a real offer, like send me the letter. Yeah, that is a great question. So yes, I do. So the first thing is what we're talking about right now is getting a pre-approval letter. And so I'll get into that on my listings in a minute. But for a buyer point of view, we want to make sure they're pre-approved. So here's a little example. Let's see, I'm trying to figure out how to, no, I can't get to all my pop-up things. Sorry guys, I want to show you a copy of a pre-approval letter. And now all my little tabs are hidden by my Zoom thing. I'm wondering if I can move this. Do you know if I can move this?
What are you talking about? One of the tabs at the top?
No, see, I want to, oh, you guys can even, you can see all my tabs.
So look at that screen. What uses your mouse?
Oh, okay. Smart. Yeah, they went away on mine. Okay, let's see. Proof. Maybe it says proof of payment. Oh, that's earnest money. Oh, there it is. So weird. It's like not even moving the way my finger is. Did it hook into my, come on. This is what I want right here. Come on. Really? If you don't, oh, wait. Ta-da, a pre-approval letter. Okay, anyone can get a pre-approval letter. You can get them in 5 minutes online on a million online websites, or they can actually talk to a mortgage lender. Thank you. And some advice I would give you is it's good to make some relationships with some mortgage lenders because you want them to look out for you and help you with your buyers. And we have a couple that we love that we use quite a bit. And I like to refer new buyers to them. I always say, like, look, it's America. You can shop rates later and stuff if you want to. But it helps me quite a bit to know that they're pre-approved with somebody that I know is like really checking them, because I don't want to spend my time, frankly, showing them homes and writing offers if it's just going to fall apart because they can't afford it. And so to get pre-approved, you usually have to say like what your income is, if you have other mortgages, sometimes you have to attach your taxes. It's usually 2 pay stubs. It's not that complicated to get pre-approved, so it doesn't take that long. So for me, it's a huge red flag if someone I'm working with won't get pre-approved. And it happens sometimes. Like they'll be like, oh no, I have the money. Like I'll do it when I need it. And where I see this a lot is actually on my listings. Like we'll have direct buyers that will call and they'll be, representing themselves and they want me to go down and show it. And I'll be like, great, send me your pre-approval letter and I'm happy to arrange a showing. And they'll say, well, I don't need one. Like I have the money, I can this and that. And I'm like, it can be from any lender. I just need some kind of pre-approval letter. Even if you'll call on the phone with this lender, like they can do it for you quick. It is not hard to get a pre-approval letter unless you're not qualified to buy. You know, yeah, it does take longer. Yeah, that is a really good point. So we're just talking about kind of a preliminary pre-approval. And so now the savvier agents, ones that have more experience, especially if you're working with the listing, might ask if the person has been underwritten. And what that means is that they've run like a credit check, they've checked their credit card debt, which is a big thing that comes up in Utah. They've checked what kind of car payments, have they co-signed on something for someone else? Like they're just basically checking them out. And then if they have, the term is they've gotten through desktop underwriting. But no, it doesn't. Yeah, we're kind of getting ahead of ourselves with the lesson, but when I receive offers on my listings, I do call the lender. You know, usually there's a number, you know, on the pre-approval letter and ask them those very questions. I want to see how far along they are. One of the things I found that's really important to ask is, have they verified their down payment? Because you can write any kind of down payment on the real estate purchase contract. You know, I really just kind of want to know if they've checked their credit, do they have their down payment? Because usually a lot of the other things work out. We're not seeing a lot of like bankruptcies and things in this market. But in the past, like when I first started real estate, we'd often run into qualification questions coming off of that old recession that we had. But I haven't seen it for a while. So what comes up more now is maybe debt to income ratio, because things are so expensive. I mean, it's crazy what people have to spend on their first home right now. It is so expensive. And so just making sure that they have the income to do it. Can you guys I don't know if I could hear the Zoom people. I wonder if they can hear me okay. Oh, Kenny's the only one.
Yeah, sounds good.
Okay, you can hear me okay? Well, you're the only one on Zoom, so that's good. I'll just kind of sit more with these guys.
Oh, we got 3 people on Zoom aside from me.
Oh, okay, sorry. Do I click? Yeah, that is a call. That's a call with the lender. Okay, I got screwed up before, so let me just go back to where we were. So pre-approval letter. Okay, so checklist to prepare an offer. So we want to make sure whoever you are out the door with, like, do not show a house unless they have a pre-approval letter. Again, this is like the most basic step of real estate. I like to buy investment properties. And so like, I always kind of keep a running pre-approval on myself, you know, so I'm ready. A lot of investors do, but anyone that's looking to buy, and their pre-approval letters are actually good for like 6 months. Like you can, you know, attach one to offers for 6 months. So you want people to really kind of, you know, well, it's really just more about their qualification, but yeah, that's just sort of the rule with how this works. Okay, the next thing is it says produce a competitive market analysis, a CMA. Have you guys heard that term before? Do you know what it is? Okay, so a CMA, this is so weird, like I just can't find like all the stuff I want. So a CMA basically is a way to see that they're not overpaying for a house and what the market value is. Although this is like so crazy in this market because like everything that's sold in the past is like not what it's gonna sell for right now because the market's going up like every month. So I am not like attaching CMAs right now because you don't want to discourage them, you know, on like what they could have. Yeah, like if they're offering 6 on the same houses that sold for 5 like 6 months ago, like it's not going to make them feel warm and fuzzy about their offer. I do CMAs a lot more when I'm basically working with sellers on pricing their house. But I did have one here. I don't know where it is. Let me just see if I can find it. Oh, here. Here's my CMA. So the MLS actually produces a really good CMA, and I'll see if I can just go on and get it. Yeah. So this is not a CMA class, so I'm not gonna like kind of really go deeply into it. But the MLS, I'll just show you where I do them, has a really good cloud CMA that's right here. Can you guys see this? The cloud CMA is really great because it includes like all the pictures and like stats on things that have sold. There is a CMA that's just one of the options as you're searching. Maybe you've noticed before, but the one that I use is this cloud CMA. And the reason why is that it just is a much nicer package, like to send somebody. And so let's see if I can get into it and kind of show you some of these that I've done. This is actually a really great way to find buyers and sellers too, because everyone wants to know what their house is worth. So as we've been doing like our 36 touch and reaching out, I'm sure you guys have probably been compiling people in your sphere. A really like non-threatening way to reach out to them is be like, hey, are you wondering what your house is worth? And, you know, and you can do these type of things right here. So here's one I did recently for an investor that is thinking of selling a condo in Saratoga Springs. And so here's the CMA. This is right from the MLS. And, you know, it has the address and, you know, shows kind of the comparables. But here's the things I like about the CMA. The cloud CMA, it includes the interior pictures. So it's nice because a lot of times their people will feel like, you know, their house is like better than anything else out there. Like it's the nicest, best. And like, it's helpful to show things like this one. Like this is nicely remodeled. Like you can see they did new flooring. It looks like there might be granite or something, you know, nice countertops. And so it's kind of helpful with pricing to, I feel like, to have pictures besides just stats. But you get all the pictures here. And then the thing I really like is at the end, the analysis, it tells you things like this, like what was the average price per square foot that sold? How much above asking did they sell for? So you can see like, these are all like Saratoga Springs condos. You know, there's a lot of them out there. So it wasn't too hard to find comparables, but you can see like they're selling on average 103 above asking price. So I know, you know, that there's likely that we'll, again, I did this for seller, but if I was doing this for buyers and doing it the way that the checklist says, it might just be helpful to prepare them that things are selling for like over asking price, you know, and how quickly, like days on market and all of that stuff too. 4 days on market. So they got to act fast. So it is helpful information, but as far as pricing, like I said, it's a little bit more discouraging on the buyer side because most likely they're going to pay more than any of these, but it helps. Sometimes you can get the outlier. Like here's this $292 square foot. Do you see this one up here? You know, sometimes it's helpful to have some that sold higher and you can use that. And the word that I have been using in this market is I'll be like, look, it's gone up every month. That was like from 2 months ago. So if it was 292, then like we're at least 300 right now. And so it helps to kind of prepare people. You know, another little tip with showing homes is before you show it, actually call the agent and see if there's offers on it already and how long it's been on the market. And if they say, oh, I just listed it today, but we have like 20 showings or something, it's really helpful to be like, when I take the buyer through, I'll say, look, I'm showing you this $500,000 house, but do you like it at 550? Because that's what this is going to be. Is this a 550 house to you? And a lot of times that kind of sorts it, because if they're like settling at 5, like there's no way they're going to get that house. But if they love it enough to pay 550, then it's kind of worth writing the offer. Does that make sense? So it can be helpful to just really kind of prepare people as much as you can, because they're going to go to war, you know, for this house, most likely in this market. And so I think at least half of the houses in Utah sold in bidding wars, the state said last year. So anyway, so that's a CMA. And I would recommend, while you guys have a little time and you're learning, to play around with the CMA. It's great to become kind of fast at them, because that way you can whip them out when you need them. And so basically, to do a CMA, you would just start, I'll kind of just give you like a 1-minute tutorial. Like if we were looking for condos in Saratoga Springs that sold at that amount, I wouldn't go all the way to February a year ago. Like it's not even, I've been doing like 3 or 4 months, unless there's no comparables. Okay, so I'm doing have you guys played around with the MLS at all? Are you familiar with where I am right now? So you go to condo, date sold, range, and then I'm gonna do city, which was Saratoga Springs. And then I also do the year, although in Saratoga Springs, everything's new anyways, but you know, if you're dealing in kind of older areas, sometimes you don't want to compare a condo that's like built in 1970 to one that was built in like 2008. Difference? I personally, it depends. If it's brand new, I only go like a year or two. If it's like a 2006 house, I usually do like 2000 to 2017 or something. And if it's 1970, I usually do like up to 2000. That's sort of my trick. But anyways, I forgot, let's just say it was 1,500 square feet. So I'm gonna do like 13 to 17. Okay, so there's 3 that popped up, 3 comps. So I'm gonna look at results. There they are. And then I'm gonna click on them. And then I have all these. Okay. I have all these choices, right? And I'm gonna go right down here to Cloud CMA. And then it's gonna whip up what I just showed you right there. Is that easy? So it doesn't take long at all. Yeah, what actually takes the longest is if you're looking for more of like a unique house and you're trying to find comparables. A newer condo in Saratoga Springs, I mean, that's simple because you can find a million of 1,500 square feet condos, you know, in Saratoga Springs. But like if you have a really like cute old house that's been fixed up or something, you know, it'll take more. So that's the CMA. Sorry to kind of digress, but I think it's like helpful information. Do you guys have any questions about CMAs before we go back to our checklist? Okay, so we will go back to our slides. Okay, so prepare. So we're getting a pre-approval letter. We can do some research on pricing. Basically, that's what they're saying with the CMA. It's helpful to kind of see what things have sold for. You can also, again, this is what dates it. It used to be that we would see price reductions and strategize to price less. Do you guys know how to find the tax records or the history on a house at all? Show you just so you can do it. So we'll go back to the MLS. Here's our basic home sheet, right? We're gonna go search. And we can find taxes just in here. Tax data search, so it was search, tax data search. Another trick is if we just look for houses. These aren't gonna represent what I want because everything's bid up instead of bid down. But you can go to the tax, you can go to history. See this just a history shows you the MLS history, the tax ID. Yeah, so you can see the history of pricing here. Like they have actually switched around the price a little. Like they started at 260, then they reduced to 250, and then they went to 280, and then they reduced to 260. So actually there was some movement. So what that tells me when I'm working with a buyer is like, hey, at one time they were willing to take 250. So it kind of gives you some information. It's rare to see this in this market right now. Like normally, like whatever they priced it at, like they're gonna get or more. But hypothetically, you could look at the history. It's only a click. It probably doesn't hurt to do that. Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay, so let's go back to our slides again. Oh, ensure the property is still available. Oh, I cannot tell you this enough. I have made this mistake so many times when I'll set up a showing, show it, they love it. I'll call the agent to ask if they have offers and they've just accepted one. And I'm just like, no, why did I drive and spend like the evening doing this? And now I've got them excited about a house that wasn't even available. Yeah. So, I mean, I just can't say this enough. And if you don't want to call, just text. Most agents respond to text a lot quicker than they do calls. All it has to be is a sentence. Hey, I'm showing your listing tonight. Any offers yet? Anything I should know? And they'll usually reply back like, yeah, we have 4 offers. Highest and best is Monday. Or, hey, the sellers need to stay for 2 months. You know, they're building a house. Like they'll give you kind of some background. So when you're there with your buyer, it makes you look really informed too. Because, you know, they could go see the house themselves, right? They don't really need us to open a door. You know, what they're hiring a realtor for is the help. So it's helpful. I think it's, you know, they like to kind of have that information. I wish I was like better about bringing comparables and stuff with me. I just usually am so short on time. I haven't, but you know, I've always sort of wanted to get there, you know, someday. So anyway, so this is our list before we do an offer. So any questions on this? So make sure, again, you're going to call the agent before you show it. You know, again, prep your buyers with the reality of the situation. And it could be the opposite. Like say you call and the agent's like, yeah, actually, you know, we thought it would sell right away, but it's, you know, been sitting here for a couple weeks. Then once you see it with your buyer, you can be like, man, this has been sitting here a couple weeks. You know, that's old in this market. And we used to brag that we would sell them within a month. Like in my first marketing, that was like our big advertising. But now a month, that means ancient, tainted listing, right? So if you could just, you know, have that information, you'll look like a star. All right, so let's see, where am I? Okay, checklist to writing an offer. Again, I felt like another pretty good checklist. We're supposed to practice writing offers at the end. So I'll kind of walk you through a real estate purchase contract. But here's a really good checklist of some things to talk about with your buyer before you write the offer. You know, of course, price. We just talked about that, right? So price. This is written for all markets. And so it said, make sure to read the seller's disclosures first, you know, before you offer. I don't know if you guys are familiar with seller's disclosures, but seller's disclosures, let's say I had one to pull up. I don't know where all my things went. So let me find a seller's disclosure for you. It's basically a form that the sellers have to fill out that basically tells all the history of the house. Sometimes you'll get a seller's disclosure form that is like completely blank because it's being sold by a bank or a relative that's never been in the house. But most of the time that you get one, actually I'm going to keep that up. I wanted to show you something. It basically like gives you a lot of great information. So what this says is to read through the seller's disclosures and basically like make sure there's not something that is like, let's see, here's the seller's disclosure. So it's a 6-page document that the seller fills out. It tells how long, you can see the years, how long they've been living there. They're supposed to put like house maintenance, if they've like had a flood, you know, utilities hooked up. So the lesson actually talks about considering this before you offer. I will tell you, it's like maybe 95% of listings don't have this on it in Utah before you offer. It's just not kind of part of our culture to do it ahead of time. Probably be a good thing if we did, but it's just rare to actually have that information. So what I would say about this, just to not discount it with the lesson, is once you're under contract, make sure you read this and look through it and just be aware. sellers will think you're a superstar if you'll look through it and kind of like point out things that they should know. Like sometimes, so there was like a little something here. I guess they winterized the sprinklers. Like, if you just read through it and kind of know, a lot of times these might actually say something a little bit, more important to know. And so, yeah. So anyways, the lesson talks about actually looking at this too. Again, I would be surprised if you'll see one before you write an offer, but just consider it when you're under contract. Like, don't, brush it off. I just think it's more like our culture. Like in other states, like in California, they actually require the realtor to fill out one of those, the buyer's agent to fill out one, and the seller. And it's like this whole big production, like, which is actually probably pretty smart, because as realtors, we probably notice things, like, so they're sort of seeing what the realtors notice when they go through. A lot of states actually, like, it's their expectation to post an inspection report. Utah, we're just not. And even sometimes when I get an inspection before one of my listings, I'll post it. It's like 1 week old, and the buyer will come and do like their own inspection. So I don't really like, it's just not kind of our culture, I guess. Seems a little inefficient, but we just haven't. So another thing to talk about when you're getting ready to write the offer is ask your buyers like what kind of timing they need. Like, again, the lender will tell you what kind of loan they're doing. So if they're doing conventional, it's probably 30 days. But do they have to move in right away, or can they give a little time, for them to move out? Discuss how quickly you want the offer responded to, like, and again, this was written in another time. It's sort of rare that I can be like, hey, you better get your seller to respond to me by 5 tonight. I mean, we're like the beggars representing buyers right now. I mean, it's very much like, when can we hear? Will it be within the week? Any idea? Oh, you're getting more offers? Okay, well, keep us posted. We'd love this. That's kind of like what the reality of it is right now. And again, financing terms. So, it's good to kind of know what you're going to insert into the offer. So here's some really great questions just to kind of like consider before you offer. Any questions about these questions? No? Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's an advantage. So, okay. So we are supposed to write an offer. And so I gave you guys paper ones because it tells us to like all log into Command and do it. I'm going to just show you how I write them in the MLS. I actually don't write my offers through Command. I write them through the MLS and then add them to Command. So I'll show you how I do it, and you guys can follow along in your paper copy, and we'll kind of just walk through it. Okay, so if you go to Forms, if we're back to the home page, let's just go back to logging into the MLS, like you're just right there. You'll see you have choices. We can search for listings, and there's one called Forms. Do you guys see that? Is it up there? Form library. You can also save forms. So look, I save copies of all my offers and things I'm writing, because chances are the minute you send this to a buyer, they're going to ask you to make a change. So like, if I can give you any advice, save everything, because then you won't have to rewrite it a second time. But we'll go to the form library, and here's all the state's forms in one place. And so I'm going to look for real estate purchase contract. And this is exactly what I just printed out for you guys. So it's the same thing. So one of the things I really like about doing it in the MLS is everything's like can be auto-populated and it's just right here. So it can be a little faster and easier. I don't know. I'm not the best. I wouldn't teach a Command course because I have people, on my team that help me with these things. And so it may do it and I don't know, but this is kind of how I do it. So I'll have to ask my TC and I could get back to you. So again, we're going to like do the date. I don't want to make this complicated for you guys, but you can auto-populate some information in here. Have you seen that before? I don't even know what listing this. Oh, I need to find. Okay, look, I auto-populated with something. I just typed in a MLS number, but actually you would find the listing you're interested in and get that MLS number, that 7-digit number, and you would just plug it right in here and you fill and update fields. And it's nice because it will load like the tax ID for you and everything. For some reason, it does not load the seller name. And like, if I had any influence with the MLS, I would beg that to be added. It's such a pain. But one little trick of the trade is you can just write owner of record and do an addendum later. So if I'm really rushed and I don't have time to look up the seller, I'll just write owner of record and then correct it later. Okay, so we'll walk through an offer. So we put our date. This is between Ashley Jensen, me, the buyer, and owner of record. And we're talking about earnest money. Do you guys know what earnest money is? So earnest money is basically something like this. It used to be checks. Sometimes we bring in actual checks, but most of the time now at Keller Williams, we're using this program called Earnest, where they kind of send the money, transfer it from their bank account. And so you'll get like a little receipt like this. But earnest money is basically a deposit you put down on the house before you purchase it. And in Utah, unless you negotiate otherwise, it's refundable, 100% refundable during the due diligence period of time. Do you guys know what due diligence is? Do you know that term? So due diligence is really great in Utah, and we're one of the only states that is this flexible. You can cancel for any reason during due diligence. Even like, hey, I woke up and I don't feel good about it. Or, hey, I found another house I like more. Or it can be anything. You can cancel for any reason during the due diligence period of time in Utah and get your earnest money back. You also can get your earnest money 100% refunded before the financing and appraisal deadline, but you have to have a pretty good reason, because the listing agent's not going to be nearly as friendly about that cancellation. So you have to show that, like, I just actually had one cancel for financing recently, which is kind of unusual in this market, but it turned out a buyer, both of my buyers, husband and wife, both worked at BYU. And one of them was tenured and the other was a year-to-year contract. And so the lender like flagged their ability to buy without selling their house when they learned the wife was on the year-to-year contract. So sometimes like things come up, that are financing related, but you have to kind of show it. You can't, like it's not as simple as like, hey, I woke up and changed my mind. Okay. But anyway, so we have this earnest money. In Utah, the standard right now is about 1% earnest money. Like that's kind of what's expected. On my listings, I don't take less. And I'll tell you why. I feel like a really great realtor from making every mistake, out there. And one of my worst experiences as a realtor was taking $1,000 earnest money. So this was probably like 7 years ago. I was still kind of new, and I was able to get a listing in South Jordan, and I was really glad to have a listing. And at the time, it was hard because houses weren't selling like they are now. Like you would take a listing and you just hope it would sell within like, a few months. You wouldn't have to hold it for like a year, showing it and advertising it and everything. So it was just like totally different times. So I took this house that had been like a rental, and it was like just, smelled inside. And I actually would have dealt with the house differently now. I've learned there's things I can do to like clean it up and different things. But at the time, I just sold it vacant as it was. And it took a while to find a buyer. So we got a buyer who offered, I don't know, least somewhat close to our asking price. And they put $1,000 for earnest money. So right here, they just put like $1,000. And I didn't even think about it. I didn't even what could go wrong? So glad to have a buyer for this listing, right? So what happened was my people ended up, having to make mortgage payments on this because it was vacant. Their renters had moved out. And the buyer kept running into challenges. So they asked for like a 2-week extension, and then like another 2-week extension, and then like another extension. And we're just like granting them like as the naive, little agent I was. And again, it was a different time because there wasn't like a guarantee you would just like find another buyer as quick. So it's like, it was easier to try to give them extensions than to maybe start the process all over again. But anyways, we gave them 3 extensions. My people had moved to California, so I had them sign their portion. We were like going to closing, and I get a call. And I remember I was actually on the realtor tour caravan, and the buyers like had skipped town and went to Mexico or something. And we're just like gone and weren't going to close. And in Utah, they don't have to. The only thing that they are liable for is their earnest money. So I had $1,000 to give my sellers who had made like 2 extra mortgage payments on their delays on top of the months that it had been on the market, who were struggling financially. And we had to start all over again and ended up taking less money than our original offer. And I could not have felt worse. And from that day, I have never, ever, ever, ever taken $1,000 earnest money again, because it's at least got to cover a mortgage, right? Or their mortgage. And so in Utah, and actually it's changing because of the intensity of the market. Like most people are putting about 1%, but I would say up until 2 years ago, like most of the offers came by with like $1,000. If it was like $1 million house, you might see 5,000. But that was something after that experience I never did again. And agents would be like, why are you asking for so much? I mean, that's crazy. Like, I've lived through this before. Like, if you don't show up, I mean, there's nothing to offer our sellers.
Is it possible?
Yeah.
And I was financially strapped, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I can't keep making payments, so I'm gonna keep getting extended.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a way to write an addendum? As this listing agent saying, once we go under contract, over every 30 days or whatever, if you keep it, or for every extension, you need to put $100,000 earnest money.
Yeah.
A house payment earnest money.
Mm-hmm. It's all negotiable. If anyone asks you extension, start looking with your eyes wide open. Yeah. Yeah. So there's some, I would be all over that lender for I was just naive, I just was like believing too good in everyone. And, I just felt like it would all work out, and unfortunately, this is one of the first ones that I had that ended really badly like this and kind of, opened my eyes. But I think one thing I didn't do as much with that I do now is with an extension, although I did start calling the lender and wanting to know, but they weren't they just weren't telling me like the whole story. I think now I would want the whole story before I like granted any kind of extension. I think I was like too cautious, like afraid to ask, don't want to ask things I shouldn't know, type things. Whereas now it's like, hey, if you want this, you better spill the beans and show me how this is going to happen, and put more money down and, put more skin in the game. So the questions you're asking about whether you should ask for more earnest money for an extension is a very good one. And I would say yes. The only thing I'll say no, I don't want to like complicate things, but if it's like really at the end, like we're talking like a day or two, it can complicate things to have more earnest money, because if it's already gone through like the final underwriting, then you have to like go back to underwriting. So it's something like that. Maybe don't, because it's closer to close, but in like 2 weeks. Yeah. Okay. So property, so this auto populated the address for me right here, and it put the tax ID number. And the next section talks about included items. Now, this little included items is like basically compiled from probably all the things that people like sued over like over the years. As I've been a realtor, this REPSI has been revised a couple times, you know, over the years, and this list changes. So like, so one of the things that's new from when they changed it about 2 years ago is they added TV mounts. But it's just, I would just read through it and just see what's included, like solar panels. That's something that's new. You know, cooktops, dishwashers, water softeners, that was a new addition. So a lot of things are included. And I point this out because if you're working on the seller side and they're planning on taking their water softener, you need to make sure that that's like documented on the MLS, because if it is not documented on the MLS or excluded in the offer, like they're leaving the water softener. Another little, again, mistake that made me great was, again, I had a listing around that same time, and I'm very, very excited again to have a listing. At the time, it was really hard to get them. And I didn't pay attention to this section, included items. So now this auto-populated for me from that listing. You know how I put in that MLS number, and whatever listing that was on Bumblebee Springs, they actually are planning to leave their fridge. But let's just say this is like normal listings. If you have this form, it doesn't include anything other than what's here, right? So consider what, like if you have a buyer that really wants the fridge and really wants the washer and dryer, this is the place you ask for them. Because if it's not here, it's not getting left unless they're probably bringing money for it later. So on the opposite side, one of the times when I had this listing, it was in the River Bottoms in Provo. I was so excited to finally have an offer on my listing because I had had it for months, which again was the old way. You'd have it for a very long time. I was happy that an offer came in a range that my seller would accept. And the only thing I was like really looking at was the price. So happy we have an offer that this is going to work. I didn't even pay attention to this, that this was checked, right? So what happened was, we closed. Again, I was the listing agent. The buyer moved far away with their fridge, not noticing that there is a refrigerator box checked. And the buyer moved in and freaked out because the fridge was included. And the seller was shocked because they'd never been told by their agent. They're not, you know, most people are not that familiar with these contracts to really pick everything out. They weren't told by their agent that they had to leave the fridge. So I bought the fridge, and actually they had a very expensive, new, nice fridge, and they wouldn't let me just give them a credit. I ended up having to spend $3,000 on a nice new fridge. And to this day, I have never missed a fridge box again. Sometimes you learn through the pain. So I would just say, like, really pay attention to this on both sides. And these are conversations to have with your buyers, because what I've had sometimes is I'll be like chumming along and writing the offer and okay, what price and this and that. And then we'll get under contract and they'll be like, the fridge was included, right? Or the washer and dryer, like, I'm getting those, right? And I'll, no, I forgot to ask. You know, they had them excluded, you know, on the MLS. I just didn't think about it. Right now they're a little more understanding because you're just fighting for the home, but in normal markets, like, it's something to talk about early. At one point, I like was so proficient in fridges, I could go in and say exactly what they cost when I'd go in houses. It was like a game because it was always like this negotiation. But right now, if the seller doesn't want to leave the fridge, like, you're not getting the fridge in our market. But in a normal market, they often are negotiated.
Despite what you put on the MLS, you list the house and say the refrigerator is excluded, you know, the shed's excluded, and then they send you an offer. You can't just take for granted that they're still excluded, because their offer can say,
Yeah.
you can say, well,
Mhm.
That's so. It's still the same product.
Yeah, I don't know if you guys on Zoom heard that, but the comment of the correct one was just, if you put on the MLS that the fridge is excluded and the offer comes over and it's included, this trumps what's on the MLS. Unless you send a counter offer and say, no fridge, they're taking it. But whatever is signed as the offer trumps whatever's on the MLS. Okay, so and then it also says excluded items. Sometimes you'll see things like I think I spelled that wrong. However you spell chandelier. Here's my spell check. Sometimes chandeliers will be excluded, or trampolines. I see trampolines a lot excluded. So, there might be things like that. And water service, this REPC covers pretty much all of Utah. So like you go to more remote areas or Camas or something, they might come with water shares and things. And so you deal with that, but they're included unless excluded from the sale. And water shares are worth a ton of money right now. So if you're representing a seller that has water shares, they probably don't want to include them for free, or else you got to factor that into the sales price, because they often sell like 25,000 or something crazy for some of these water shares, and builders need them for developments and stuff. Okay, so then you do your purchase price. I don't even know what that house is. Okay, nice to meet you. See you later.
So much.
One little tip of the trade is I wouldn't do an even number. Do a little bit of a different number than just 600,000 in case there's others. Again, the earnest money is going to be about 6,000. Let's say they're putting 20% down. So, their cash they're bringing to closing is 114. And then whatever that subtraction is for 481. Is that right? I don't know if my math is right. I don't have a calculator, but is that right? Am I wrong? I think I'm wrong. Oh, well, okay, pretend it's right. So anyways, you're gonna put like your loan. This is where you do this. When you're on the selling side, actually, this is an important thing because you want to see how much they're putting down, especially where appraisals might be an issue. So like this is actually a really good buyer because they're putting 20% down. A lot of times I'll see things not in this price range actually, because it's a little too high, but they might be doing like a Utah housing loan or something, and they're not putting like much down at all, And so it's important to notice this, because if the appraisal comes low and all they have is like $10,000 to put down on this expensive house, then you need to prep your sellers that they're going to be making up the difference, with a low appraisal. So it's helpful to see. But I will tell you, I've never once ever seen the amount that people have brought to closing to this dollar amount. It all changes with the lender, but you overall just want to kind of know like what kind of loan they're doing, basically how much they're bringing. So the next section is sale of the buyer's property. So it either is or is not conditioned, and an agent that on the listing side, that's something I really look for, because you need to know if you have to wait for them to list the property and sell it, or is it under contract? Like, what's the story? Okay, so moving on, settlement. Section 3.2 is something really important to consider in this market. So you'll see on possession, it says it can record upon recording, which basically means when they have the cash, you get the keys, sort of slang on what upon recording means. If I could give you any advice, never, ever, like ever have a closing be on a Friday. Do Monday through Thursday, because you will just open a Pandora's box of problems with a Friday closing, because then you have to go into the weekend and it won't actually fund and record until Monday. So in Utah, in most cases, you sign on the settlement date, but you don't fund and record until the next business day. Does that make sense? So it's just so much easier to close Monday through Thursday and then have it fund and record the next business day that's during that same week. Again, learn from mistakes with U-Hauls in the driveway, with people needing to move in out the same day. So in this market though, both when you're on the buyer side as well as when you're the listing agent, it's becoming pretty common to ask for some days to move out. It's called, the term is occupancy. So most of the times that I'm working with buyers, like even if they said they don't need extra time to move out, I might give them like 7 just auto populate. I'll give them like a week to move out. Sometimes when you're competing against a lot of people, it can just be one of those little things that just is convenient and helpful. But when you are working with this seller, it's really important to learn what their needs are, because it's really convenient to negotiate this now. It will be the worst nightmare to do it on the day of closing, and probably won't happen in their favor. They'll be getting hotels and stuff. So, you know, I always ask them, what do you need? Do you need a week to move out? You know, should we ask for a rent back? You know, can you be out and this and that? And so.
Have you ever had an issue where you say, okay, we'll give you 3 weeks occupancy after, and you get to that point and they're just like, we're sorry, we're not ready to move out yet, or something. What do you do?
Yeah, I have had that. Like if the occupancy end comes and they're still not ready to move out, too bad. You got to be out. Because then it's like a legal issue. So, I mean, it kind of depends on how flexible your buyers are. You know, like sometimes I'll be working with out-of-state people and they'll be like, oh, I'm not here for 2 more weeks anyways, it's fine. But if it's really like they're displaced and they've been waiting, I'm sorry, you had, you know, a month's notice, you know, you got to get out.
Jump out of the house, pay a hotel,
Mhm. Yeah, I always,
motivation to work out, I guess.
I called Dean. I really do. That's a good call for Dean, and he can help work it out. I don't think the sheriff would come out that quickly. Like usually you have to file paperwork, but there could be like penalties or something. So anyways, usually brokers know all the threatening terms and it gets people to move out. So okay, the next section has to do with HOAs, and where more and more houses are in HOAs in Utah, this is really kind of becoming a section not to dismiss. So it talks about how HOA fees will be prorated at closing. That's kind of like taxes, right? Like pay based on the date it closes and HOA dues. The part to not just skip over and pay attention to is this one, special assessments. This can be a nightmare. If there is a special assessment, sometimes we don't have like the latest copies of the minutes and things. When you're under contract on a house during the seller's disclosure deadline, you should actually get a copy of the CC&Rs. But sometimes they're just not as current as like the last meeting or something. And this says if there's any assessments that are done prior to, you know, any assessments that have been designated, you know, required of the owners, even if it's not due yet, but if it's in place and mandated, it has to be paid for by the seller or buyer. So I actually had a little situation with this about a year ago. Just out of habit, I always check seller, you know, like just kind of just in case. I didn't even really think any more of it. But anyways, what happened was this apartment building in Salt Lake had actually just determined that they were going to assess every apartment owner, condo owner, $16,000 so they could redo the exterior. And the agent who was also the owner, like didn't want us to know because he didn't want to like get the $16,000, you know, have to pay that. And so we actually closed on the house, not knowing. And then my buyers call me and they're like, we just got a letter from the HOA saying that we owe $16,000. And so we researched it to see when it was, you know, when it had been determined, I guess, that was going to be required, which had been like 2 months before or something. And because we had checked seller, that seller actually had to pay the HOA the 16,000. Like we were able to threaten like legal action, and my buyers didn't have to pay for it. So I would just say in almost every case, check seller on special assessments, because assessments can be like 1,000, it can be 50,000. So, I mean,
So what that would mean is if I'm buying your condo
mhm,
here,
mhm,
and there's a special assessment that's due in a month,
mhm,
but you knew about it 2 months ago, and I put seller pays special assessments, and I got it, and I closed this month, and you know the assessment's not due for a month, does that, and you check seller, the fact that they knew about it
yeah,
and didn't tell you
yep,
makes them liable, or
yes.
the fact that it was um, posted that it was going to be assessed, even though they didn't have proper possession of the property when the assessment arrived.
I've had actually another one recently that also we helped someone buy last year. And this one's kind of sad because it was a young couple, but there was a notice that it was going to be assessed last year, which we gave to the buyer, like they were aware, but none of us thought it would be like crazy amounts of money. Like supposedly they were going to be fixing the decks.
So there's no dollar amount or anything.
No. And so the buyer was like, okay, well, as long as it's, we probably could come up with $5,000 or $10,000 or whatever. Well, it ended up coming back at $53,000. And it's like called Spring Creek condos in Saratoga Springs. They're having all kinds of structural problems, and the former builder is like no longer and went bankrupt or something. And so they're charging every homeowner $53,000. I've never seen anything. I was like crazy. I've never seen anything like it. But I tried to help them like with legal action, but we didn't have any standing because there wasn't like there wasn't like anything published that said it was going to be $53,000. Because I mean, we would have like run for the hills, right? Anyone would. But they did disclose to us that there might be like an assessment coming. So in that case, because it was not, officially done yet, we didn't have any recourse. But with the $16,000 exterior, that one had actually been like announced and letters had been sent, documented like 2 months before. And so we were able to say, hey, we closed on this date. Like you didn't give us this letter. Like this, we checked this box. Does that make sense what the difference was?
Thing to do, I guess, as a buyer's agent would be, if there is an HOA, not to just rely on what the listing agent gives you for HOA.
Yeah.
But verify with the HOA.
Yeah.
No assessments coming up.
Yes.
And if you do have assessments coming up, the dollars on it.
Yeah, I would never trust a listing agent to tell you what the HOA is doing. Most just don't take the time to find out. So it would really behoove your buyers to be checking into that. And also, if you have a listing, it's really good to reach out. You're going to have to get the CC&Rs anyways. So it's just good to ask those questions and know. So moving on in section 4.3C, well, so here's fees that are prorated. So escrow fees, each side pays their own. If you're dealing with an investment, you're going to kind of prorate the rents based on when it sells. So I have one closing March 3rd. It's been tricky because it's like only 3 days of rent, but the buyer gets the majority of the rent. But here's kind of the one that becomes the negotiation, the HOA fees. And a lot of HOA fees, I would say almost all new ones have some kind of like transfer fee. It's becoming very, very common to have a transfer fee. And like in Daybreak, it's 1% of the purchase price. A lot of new HOAs, I'm seeing 0.5% like all the time. And sometimes it's like older HOAs, you'll get like $100 or $500. There's usually something. It's really rare not to have some kind of transfer fee. So you need to decide with your buyer and seller who's paying for that. Is the seller going to pay for it and the buyer going to pay for it, or are you going to split evenly? So, kind of that's a negotiating point. I usually check seller in default, but in this market, I've lost bidding wars by not checking buyer or something. So it's because every little detail's being negotiated these days. So just be aware of that, because if a seller knows they have a 1% reinvestment fee, a transfer fee, and say the house is $600,000, they're gonna probably be looking to the buyer to pay that 6,000 in this market, and that's a big cost. So, do your homework on that stuff. It's hard too, where everything has to be so fast. Sometimes you can't get the HOA to call you back fast enough before you have to get the offer in. So I rarely check buyer on this. If I'm going to compromise, I might do split equally just in case it's high. But just know that's something. So the next section, it auto-populated this realtor is representing the seller. I'm representing the buyer. And it has your agency and your license numbers and everything. Okay. There's not much you have to do in section 6, but it's important for you to know about it. Once you're under contract, a seller cannot make any changes to lease agreements. I just had this happen actually on a place that I was selling, a duplex, and the tenant wanted to move out. And it was hard because we couldn't make any changes during the escrow without the buyer's blessing. And so it's just tricky because we had to actually get the buyer to agree to let her move out. But it doesn't just happen. You actually can get in a lot of trouble if you try to make changes while you're under contract.
So if I'm buying your, like
Mhm.
the basic code,
Uh-huh.
the girls that
Mhm.
or something.
Mhm.
If I'm buying that place and I tell mortgage, I've got renters in there, it's got this much income coming in, and they're like, okay, we approve for whatever, and then you go to get it, and come to close, and they're like, oh, well, those not going to have that income anymore.
Mhm.
Cancel your deal.
Yeah, actually, the seller can be in default if they make changes to the contract. So
Because you could lose your financing if your income
yeah.
goes down because of
Yeah, and actually, if a seller is in default, they have to return your earnest money and match it. So, it's just something to be aware of. A lot of people don't realize that they can't make any changes to that. And also, Airbnbs are popular right now, so you need to make sure that those are, worked out. One thing that's been happening a little bit lately that never happened before is in Utah in section 6.2, it says that the seller will provide a title insurance policy. They are about 0.5% of the listing price. So they're not cheap. They're usually like several $1,000s. And I am starting to see buyers offer to pay the title insurance policy. But if it's not otherwise specified, it's the seller's obligation in Utah. Any questions on that? Okay, so next section just basically says that the seller is required in Utah to provide a seller's disclosure, which I already showed you. So I just usually warn them that they'll have to do it. And so in section 8, it talks about if you're going to have due diligence or not. So most people will do due diligence, even in this market where people are like waiving crazy things. I usually just ask for like at least 3 days or something just to like do a little homework on the property before their earnest money is totally committed. But it's up to you to check it is or it is not conditioned. And this goes on to say what I said before, like you can cancel in Utah for any reason for due diligence. Here are all the things you should check during due diligence. And then here's all the reasons you can cancel basically for any reason, the due diligence. It would be worth your time to read through that. In section 8.2, we put whether there is or is not an appraisal. So if they're doing a loan, it's probably always going to be an is. unless they just are coming with a lot of cash and could make up whatever, but if we're talking about a traditional, like conventional, like 5% down loan or something, you're probably going to say it is conditioned and you are going to have financing. So I always ignored this section until this busy market. But in 8.3i, this can basically talk about how your earnest money, it used to be, as I said before, your earnest money could be refundable all the way until your financing deadline, 3 weeks later. But what this is saying is what percent is going to be non-refundable after the due diligence deadline. So say you're in a bidding war, one ways to be competitive is you can be like, look, I'm going to make $3,000 non-refundable after the due diligence before the financing deadline or something. So just know this is another negotiation point in this market. Okay. Section 9 is if you're going to have any addenda. So if you're going to do like a FHA loan addendum or a 1031 exchange, if you're going to write terms in an addendum, like I'm not going to ask for repairs or whatever, this is where you check that an addendum is going to be part of this. Section 10 talks about a home warranty. I think home warranty companies must be totally suffering in this market because it used to be that I didn't even like think. I was just like, will, buyer, seller. Buyer gets to choose the home warranty. Buyer gets to determine which package, and the seller will contribute $500. But I haven't submitted an offer with a home warranty in a while. It's one of those things that works against you in a bidding war. So, it might be a good move to have your buyers still buy one for themselves.
Tell your buyers,
Yeah.
don't worry about it, go buy it.
But anyways, it's just kind of one of those things where you don't want to lose it over a home warranty. So I kind of have been not including those as much. Yeah. Okay, so section 11, it just talks about a buyer has a right to walk through before they close. This actually becomes problematic fairly regularly for me because what happens is sellers get super stressed and their house is all torn up in like a huge mess. And the last thing they want is their buyer walking through, right? As they're at their most stressful days, like getting ready for the moving truck. So if I can give you any advice, because the buyer does have a right to do this, just sort of prep your sellers early and also maybe try to get the buyers in earlier too. Like don't leave it for like the last day when everything's stressful, or at least like, I find that, having communication is just a lot better than like not communicating about something. Like even if it's bad news and not what they want to hear, like bringing it up and talking about uncomfortable things is way better than, just ignoring it and then having some big thing come up. So I would just say, like, when you're working on the seller side and they're packing and they're stressed, it might just be good to be like, just remember, the buyers get to come through, I'll see if they can come through this week, and, just give them notice. Just don't spring it on them like, hey, can they stop by tonight? Which is what usually happens. And then they're like, oh, my child's sick and I'm behind, I don't want them. And then the buyer's like, well, I have a right, I get to walk through, And so it can become this whole like heated thing where if you can kind of be proactive about it, you can prevent a lot,
We're closing on the 30th. The buyer needs to be out of the house by the 27th. You can do a final walkthrough, make sure everything.
Yeah.
All your stuff's gone. You don't have a couch covering a hole in the wall.
Yeah, I mean, one of the big reasons why you would do a pre-settlement walkthrough was often to check and make sure the repairs were done. Sometimes you can ask for repairs in transactions. It's kind of less and less in this market, but I just went and did one for a buyer last week, and they were supposed to make sure the faucets in the bathroom stopped leaking, and that they also had to do some vents to the attic. And so I went and noticed the attic vents were like amazing, but the faucets were still leaking. And so we were able to kind of get that sorted out. So I would just say try to be a little proactive on that. On section 12, changes during the transaction, we're going to just put everything in writing always. Always, always on an addendum. Just because you and an agent agree on something, they'll miraculously forget. Another little mistake. I once worked with an agent who used to be at this office. Actually, I'm still mad that it was a Keller Williams agent, but we were talking about some repairs and things. And he's like, you know what, they'll just throw in the washer and dryer. Like, that's how we'll make it up. They'll give you the washer and dryer. And I was like, okay, awesome. And I trusted him. I knew him, and then sure enough, like we're closing in, there's no washer and dryer. And he's like, I didn't say there was a washer and dryer. I'm like, well, I'm not like deaf. Like, I mean, but I didn't get it in writing. And so I had nothing. I had nothing. So I ended up giving them like a nice little gift card to contribute, but they still had to buy a washer and dryer. So just know, like, even if they are your best friend, it better be in writing, or there's just no things and things. So 13, authority of signers, they can sign for themselves. This is in 14 a legal contract. Mediation, always, 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 always check may. Again, learn the hard way on this one. I got sued about 5 years ago because I listed a lot that said it had sewer hookups, like hookups to water and sewer, because that's what the seller told me, and it was a blank lot. So it's not like how would I know? I'm not going to dig up to see where the hookups are, right? And in fact, we checked with the city, and the city said, yeah, it has hookups or whatever. Well, come to find out, they're building the house, and the sewer hookup had been hooked up, like the neighbor's house had hooked up to their sewer hookup, basically. So there was no sewer hookup. So they sued me for like false advertising, basically. The city takes no liability for anything ever. Yeah, no, the city will take no liability ever. They will never be liable ever. Like, they have every out ever. And the thing about it is, we as agents are insured. So you're insured by being here at Keller Williams. And so, anyways, I was the listing agent, but they had clicked shall. And so the hard thing about this one is we actually had to go to mediation and pay for mediation, even though we kind of like were able to settle it. So always check may. It's like the fridge. I never.
So you had to go to mediation and say, we understand this and what's got to be done. And the mediator said, okay.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. The attorneys made way more money, than I did on that. And just as a note, Keller Williams will make you pay them a settlement, if there's a settlement due as agents. So I had to pay $5,000 on top of half the attorney fees, all for false advertising. That was not my fault. I was so angry. But, sometimes we have to deal with hiccups, but, most of our transactions never go through anything like this. So, I've probably been through 700 transactions and only had one that was like this. So, once in a while it comes, and I learned a ton. If I'm looking at the silver lining, I was a way better realtor after being sued than I was before, because it made me I document things way better. I make sure things are in writing, just different things. So, okay. I know we're almost to the end. 16 is default. So we've talked about this before. If the buyer doesn't show up to closing, the only penalty is they lose their earnest money. So make sure there's enough that it hurts if they don't show up, right? If the seller doesn't show up, they have to either return the earnest money and match it, or the seller can sue them to sell. So when I work with sellers now, one question I always ask them when I present offers is, are you still sure you want to sell? So again, another little mistake along the way, or a thing I didn't know along the way. I worked selling a house in Provo, again, about 5 years ago, to this wonderful couple that I just love, love, love to this day. And they had been in a home on the river for 30 years and were selling it to downsize. And so it took a while to find a buyer. Again, it wasn't this market, but we finally found a buyer and we accepted an offer. And then as she's getting ready to pack up the house, she's getting super nostalgic and doesn't want to move and is like falling apart, like calling me sobbing and so upset, does not want to move, won't pack boxes, like made the biggest mistake of her life. And I was devastated. I mean, I just felt terrible because I hadn't really told her, when you sign this, like it's it, like you have to sell, you know? They wanted out of it so much. They actually had me go to the buyer's agent and say, look, here you put down, I don't know what it was. It was probably like 10,000. It was significant. We'll match it. It was 5,000. We'll match it. We'll give you 10 if you'll back out of this. And they were like, no way. We want this house on the river. So, I mean, this family, she went packing, sobbing. I mean, the neighborhood came in. I mean, I did not sleep that summer. I felt so terrible about it. But, you know, they did downsize and they're super happy they did now. So like it all worked out good. You know, they needed to downsize. They were getting older. But whenever I have a seller sign to accept, I just always say, now remember, there is no way out of this contract, because there is literally like one way out of the contract. And the only way is if the buyer doesn't get their earnest money in within 4 days. And so when you work with buyers, make sure that they get their earnest money. And in this case, the buyer did. So like we didn't have that. But oh, I mean, I just felt so bad. So just, you know, make sure they realize that this is like a legal contract and they will be sued. And the buyer told us, I'm sorry, they're old and sad, but you know, like we're going to sue them. We want this house. So, you know, I had to like kind of reach out to their family and be like, I'm so sorry. Like, it's just like they signed the contract, you know, there's no going back on this. And like I said, it all worked out the way it was supposed to. I think they really ended up where they needed to go, which is what their vision was. But a lot of times sellers get very emotional during the process. And it was hard for them to leave that house. And it was awful. It was awful. So 17, if you get sued, you could have to pay the attorney fees. 19, no assignment. So this works a lot with flippers. Like they'll try to secure a house and then try to sell it to a friend to make 10,000 or something. No assignment. Sellers have to keep home insurance. This is, if they sign electronically, it's allowed. And it describes acceptance. So the last thing is you just have to put the deadlines. So I would say in this market, usually sellers' disclosure deadline is about a week. So this may be tricky with it being the end of the due diligence used to always be 14 days. I have not seen 14 days in like a year. So usually due diligence is also about a week right now, maybe 10 days if you're lucky. Financing. Yeah, that's a really good point. You don't want them to fall on a weekend. Okay, financing and appraisal deadline. Whoops, this is a mistake I've made before, actually. Make sure it doesn't switch the month. It's hard when you write one on the last day of the month. Financing and appraisal, it's usually 3 weeks. It's hard to get an appraisal faster. You can maybe call the lender and see if you can rush it. Sometimes if they're underwritten, they can move faster. Probably the shortest I've ever seen a finance and appraisal deadline is 2 weeks. It's just, appraisers aren't just like ready to go. Usually you have to make get on their list, and then it takes a few days to get it back. So I'm going to say 3 in this case. And then usually closing with the loan is 30 days, unless again, they're underwritten or something. So we'll do 30 days. And then you put a response deadline. So I would like them to get back to me tomorrow by 5. Now, let me ask you this. Do they have to get back to you tomorrow at 5? Do you guys know? The only way they would, and really they could still do an addendum, but only if they were to accept the offer 100% as it is with no changes, do they have to get back to you by tomorrow at 5. Otherwise, if they're going to counter offer, they can just due whenever and send you an addendum. So a lot of times I'll have people stressed out, like, I need to respond, my deadline was 5 on the seller side. And I'll be like, don't worry, we're not going to accept that offer anyways. We can talk tomorrow morning and we'll put it together. Yeah. So that's the real estate purchase contract. Do you guys have any questions on that?
So if you put an offer in and they don't get back to you on 5, you give them a call and just say, counter offer, or
Mhm.
reject the offer. Not see the offer, because either look for another house or wait.
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say I would definitely in this market be all over the other agent. As someone that's also on the listing side a lot with multiple offers, sometimes you get a lot and you forget like who is in what offer or this. And I always say like who is the most passionate for the house, because that's important to me, because I feel like it gets them through like the home inspection and a low appraisal if they really want the house. And so I definitely look for passion. I really am impressed when agents text me to follow up or, stay in top of me, like as a listing agent. And so I try to do the same as a buyer's agent. Hey, my buyer checked in with me. Do you know yet when you're going to be responding? They're so excited. Just want to check in again, see if you'd found a date you're going to be responding. The Millers love this house. It's their, remember the Millers really want this, and Millers have been checking in with me again. And I would say their name too, because they'll remember the buyer more than your name. So I think it does really help, and it's important to show passion. One thing that this lesson talks about that I found very interesting is they talked about love letters and putting together like a cover letter with like information. I know that's like a really hot topic, because I think they're like kind of against the law, like in Utah, but I don't know, but I will say I have lost them by not submitting one. So I just always submit them at this point. It's up to the other side to decide if they're going to read it, but I don't want to keep somebody. I had just like renewed my license and was like all paranoid about being sued for love letters. And I had someone offering on a house last summer. And so I was like, oh, we'll just put together a really good offer and submit it. And the other side put together a love letter, and we had like the same offer, and they chose them because they felt like they wanted it more, So after that, I was like, I'm always going to include one, because it at least covers, that I haven't left every stone. I've tried to make sure that no stone is left unturned. The one last thing I'll kind of show you is on the forms library also, you can get your addendum. Like if you end up needing to do an addendum. And this is great in here because it opens. That's weird. That's not what I wanted. Let's see, forms library. Oh wait, that's what I wanted. Oh man. Okay, this is what I wanted. And the reason why I like to do it in here too is it has all these different addendums right here too. So if you need a 1031 exchange, if you work with investors, if you're doing an escalation clause, I think that's in here too. Maybe it's not on this one, but there's one you can do an escalation clause. Uh-huh. Mm-hmm. 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 Yeah, so you just click on it and it's already there for you. But this is where you would write anything that's different from the contract. So some examples are, you might say like, buyer can stay for free for a week, because you can put 7 days, but the fact that it's free is like good for them to know on here and stuff. Or buyer will do an inspection but won't ask seller for repairs, or you can do some things like, and so it's your place to put things that are not in the contract. And every time you make a change during the under contract process, you'll put it on an addendum. So sometimes it could be as simple as like, you have to take the wife off the contract and just the husband's going to be on it. Or it could just be like, sometimes lenders will ask you to exclude things like remove trampoline from the contract or something. So this is your place to make any changes. And again, it has to always be in writing, because like my former KW friend, like, a handshake doesn't hold up in court. So it's got to be in writing. So yeah. So that's the real estate purchase contract. And, you know,
To get the FYP hour and
yeah. Dean, yeah, Dean keeps them all like on, he has kind of like a website, which maybe Carl Francis can send it out. I don't remember. It used to be like Yes Guys or something. I felt like it used to, I don't know if he's changed it. It used to be like YS Guys or something. Like Dean had kind of like a website where he had his stuff, but there's probably someplace more official now. So anyways, I can ask Carl to send that out so you have all those things. Well, there's more to the lesson, but I feel like we've kind of covered everything. Do you guys have any questions before we finish up? No? Yeah, I would say just get really comfortable with that real estate purchase contract. Get to the point that you can write it really fast. Like I would say practice a lot now, even before you need it. Because what will happen is you'll show a house to a buyer and offers are due in like an hour or something. So you have to like dash home, quickly write it, get it signed and get it turned over, like inevitably there's like deadlines in this crazy market right now where you have to do things really fast. So the faster you can write these and just be helpful, it can pay off. Because if you're, just writing it for the first time and you have to look through the checklist or, and again, all those things matter. So keep an eye on occupancy and what's included and, all of that stuff, assessments. So you don't have your buyer get stuck with anything they're not expecting, or seller. Again, yeah, story of the fridge. So anyways, you guys have been great to teach. So if there's anything you need, you're welcome to reach out to me. And I think that's probably good enough for today, if you guys are okay with it, right? All right. Okay, well, we'll end, and thanks you guys online for watching. And Carl didn't come down, so I assume we're kind of done, right? Does he usually come at the end or anything? Okay. Okay, and I don't know how to get off Zoom.